Crime Chronicles Confidential, where the shadows whisper secrets and the truth is darker than fiction. We bring you the most chilling true crime stories, uncovering the hidden layers behind the most baffling cases. Murders, mysteries, and sinister secrets. Nothing stays buried forever. Tonight, we take you deep into a case that shook an entire town to its core. A small, peaceful community, a trusted place of worship, and a horrifying crime that shattered the faith of those who believed they were safe. Behind the sacred walls of a church, a gruesome murder was committed. A crime so shocking, it left an entire town questioning everything they thought they knew. Stay with us as we uncover the dark secrets of a small town and the church murder that changed everything. Tucked away in the heart of the countryside, surrounded by rolling hills and endless stretches of quiet roads, Ashford was the kind of town where life felt untouched by the chaos of the outside world. It was a place where traditions ran deep, and faith was more than just a belief. It was a way of life. Generations had lived here, raising families, building memories, and passing down the values that had kept the community strong for decades. The people of Ashford prided themselves on their unity. It was a kind of town where everyone knew each other by name, where the local baker still remembered how you like your bread, and where children played freely in the streets without a worry. A place where strangers were rare and crime was even rarer. In a town like this, trust wasn't just given, it was assumed. And at the very center of it all stood St. Mark's Church. St. Mark's wasn't just a building. It was the soul of Ashford. For decades, it had been a sanctuary of peace, a place where the community gathered for worship, celebrations, and farewells. Weddings, baptisms, funerals. Every milestone in a person's life was marked within its sacred walls. The church bells echoed to the town every Sunday morning, a familiar sound that signaled the start of another day devoted to faith and fellowship. Leading the congregation was Father Daniel McKinnon, a man whose words carried weight beyond the pulpit. He was more than just a priest. He was a counselor, a guide, and to many a friend. People sought his wisdom in times of struggle, turned to him for advice, and trusted him with their deepest confessions. His presence was reassuring, his faith unwavering. But beneath the church's grand steeple, behind its intricately designed stained glass windows, a secret was festering, one that would soon shatter the town's illusion of safety. Because behind those sacred doors, within the very heart of their faith, a crime so horrific was committed that it would leave Ashford questioning everything they had ever believed in. For generations, St. Mark's Church had stood as a symbol of faith, a sacred refuge where the people of Ashford found comfort in their beliefs. Within its towering walls, prayers had been whispered, sins had been forgiven, and souls had sought redemption. It was a place untouched by doubt, a beacon of hope in an otherwise uncertain world. But now, the air inside those hallowed halls felt different. The very place that once offered salvation was now tainted by an unspeakable crime. The soft candlelight that had once flickered warmly against the stained glass windows now seemed dim, casting long, eerie shadows. The pews, where families had sat side by side in devotion, were now empty, their silence louder than any sermon ever spoken. The echoes of whispered prayers had been replaced by hushed voices of fear, murmurs of disbelief. The altar, once a place of solemn reverence, now stood as a haunting reminder of the darkness that had crept into their sanctuary. The very walls of the church, which had witnessed countless confessions, now held a secret far more chilling, a secret stained in blood. The people of Ashford had always believed that evil could never touch their town, never invade their faith. But as the investigation unfolded, one horrifying truth became impossible to ignore. The monster they feared had been among them all along, hiding in plain sight. The quiet streets of Ashford were no longer the same. A deep unease had settled over the town, creeping into the very fabric of daily life. The once warm smiles exchanged between neighbors were now replaced by wary glances. Conversations at the local cafe were no longer about weather or Sunday sermons. Instead, they were filled with hushed whispers, speculation, and an unsettling question that refused to fade. Had evil been among us all along? And if so, how did we never see it? For years, the people of Ashford had taken comfort in their trust in their community, trust in their church, trust in those who were meant to guide them. But now, that foundation had been shaken. If something this horrific could happen within the very walls of their sacred place, What else had they been blind to? Mothers held their children a little closer. Parishioners hesitated before stepping inside the church. Every familiar face now seemed like a potential stranger. Had they ignored the signs? Had they mistaken darkness for holiness? The realization was terrifying. Faith, once their strongest anchor, had been laced with doubt. The people of Ashford had always believed that their town was different, a place untouched by corruption, by deceit, by violence. But now that belief was shattered, and for the first time, they weren't just fearing what had already happened. They were afraid of what they still didn't know. It started with a simple absence, one that felt unusual but not alarming at first. Maria Grayson was known and loved by everyone in Ashford, a kind-hearted woman in her early 30s. She had dedicated her life to helping others. She taught Sunday school to the children, cared for the elderly, and never hesitated to lend a hand to those in need. Her presence at St. Mark's Church was as constant as the morning sun. So when she failed to appear at Sunday service, people noticed. It wasn't like Maria to miss church, let alone without telling anyone. At first, they assumed she might have been unwell or out of town. But when she didn't answer her phone and failed to show up at the bakery where she volunteered on Monday morning, the unease set in. Friends knocked on her door. No answer. Neighbors peeked to the windows of her small home. Everything inside looked untouched, frozen in time, as if she had stepped out for just a moment but never returned. By the third day, concern turned to fear. Maria wasn't just missing. She had vanished. The search for Maria Grayson had the entire town on edge. Flyers were posted, neighbors asked questions, and the local police combed through every possible lead. But no one was prepared for where the search would end. It was Lisa Carter, Maria's closest friend, who made the horrifying discovery. She had gone to St. Mark's Church early that morning, hoping, praying, that Maria would be there, tending to candles as she always did. But as she walked through the grand, empty halls of the church, she was met with an unsettling silence. Something felt wrong, guided by an inexplicable sense of dread. Lisa made her way toward the back of the church, past the rows of wooden pews and flickering candlelight. She reached a small door near the sacristy, one that was always locked. A storage room, she thought, a place only the clergy had access to. But today, the door was slightly ajar. With trembling hands, she pushed it open. The dim light from the hallway barely illuminated the space. But it was enough. On the cold stone floor, Maria's lifeless body lay in a pool of blood. Her clothes were torn, her face unrecognizable beneath the deep gashes and bruises. Her hands, once gentle and full of warmth, were twisted unnaturally, as if she had fought desperately for her life. And beside her, clutched in her stiff fingers, was something that made Lisa's breath catch in her throat. A broken crucifix, stained with blood. Lisa let out a scream that never reached beyond the church walls. The church, once a place of peace, now held a scene straight out of a nightmare. As the police arrived and the forensics team carefully examined Maria Grayson's lifeless body, a chilling discovery sent shivers down their spines. Near her broken, bloodied hands lay a small wooden crucifix, drenched in her own blood. The cross, once a sacred symbol of faith, now served as a silent, horrifying message. But that wasn't all. Pinned to the wall just above her body was a single piece of parchment, aged and yellowed, as if it had been taken from an old Bible. The words scrawled across it in dark red ink, perhaps blood, were simple yet terrifying. She saw, she knew, she had to be silenced. The message left little doubt. Maria hadn't been a random victim. She had discovered something so dangerous that someone had killed her to keep it buried. And now, as the investigators pieced together the gruesome scene, one question loomed over them all. What had Maria seen that was worth killing for? The moment Detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway stepped into the dimly lit room where Maria Grayson's body was found, they knew this wasn't just another crime scene. The brutality of the murder was unsettling, but it was the message left behind, the blood-stained crucifix and the cryptic note, that sent chills down their spines. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was calculated, deliberate, personal. As the forensic team examined the body, one thing became clear. Maria hadn't just been killed. She had been punished. The wounds on her body suggested torture rather than a simple murder, as if her killer wanted to make a statement. Allison crouched beside the blood-soaked crucifix, carefully inspecting it. Why leave it behind? Was it a warning? A signature? Or was it meant to mislead them? Mark scanned the small, dusty room. This place, it's not just a storage area, he muttered. It looks like it was used for something else. The walls were lined with old, faded books, not just religious texts, but handwritten journals, some dating back decades. Stacks of papers lay scattered across a wooden desk, as if someone had been searching for something. Whoever had killed Maria wanted something hidden. The question was, what did Maria find? And why was it worth killing for? As they stepped out of the crime scene and into the grand, empty church hall, their eyes instinctively drifted to the altar. The towering stained glass windows cast eerie shadows on the polished floor, but something about the stillness felt off. A murder this violent, this symbolic, happening inside a church. It wasn't just about Maria. It was about a secret buried deep within these walls. And now, it was their job to uncover it. The air inside St. Mark's Church was heavy with silence as a forensic team carefully moved through the crime scene. The once sacred space now felt tainted, each shadow in the dimly lit room hiding a sinister truth. Detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway stood over Maria Grayson's lifeless body, their eyes scanning every inch of the small, hidden room where she had met her gruesome fate. The scent of dry blood mixed with the faint aroma of old parchment and melting candle wax, creating an unsettling atmosphere. The forensic team worked swiftly, collecting evidence, but it was the peculiar details that sent a chill down their spines. The crucifix, still clutched in Maria's stiff, bloodied fingers, it was more than just a religious symbol. The bloodstains on it suggested it had been placed there after she was already dead, almost like a deliberate message. The cryptic note, written in a hurried, uneven hand, the message left behind, she saw. She knew she had to be silenced. Suggested Maria had uncovered something before she died. No signs of a struggle. Despite the brutality of the murder, the room showed no signs of forced entry or a fight. Maria either knew her killer, or she had been caught completely off guard. The blood patterns, while most of the blood pooled around Maria's body, some had been splattered onto the old books stacked nearby. When Allison picked one up, she noticed something odd. A page was missing. Footprints, but just one pair. The forensic team discovered partial shoe prints in the dried blood, but they only belonged to Maria. No sign of the killer's footprints. As if whoever did this had been careful. Too careful. Mark exchanged a glance with Allison. Whoever did this didn't just want her dead. They wanted to send a message. Allison nodded, her fingers brushing against the torn edges of the missing page. And I think Maria found something that someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. This was no ordinary murder. It was a secret buried beneath layers of faith, deception, and fear. And if Maria had uncovered something she wasn't supposed to, then someone else in this town knew exactly why she had to die. As the investigation deepened, Detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway turned their attention to the people who knew Maria Grayson best. Those closest to her, those who saw her daily, and most importantly, those who had access to St. Mark's Church the night she was murdered. Their first stop was Father Daniel McKinnon, the man who had led the congregation for over a decade, a figure of wisdom, faith, and guidance, or at least that's how the town had always seen him. But now, standing before them in his dark clerical robes, his face unreadable, his hands tightly clasped, the man who once preached about righteousness now found himself under suspicion. Allison got straight to the point. When was the last time you saw Maria? Father Daniel's jaw tensed. She was here that evening. She often stayed late, organizing the church records, helping with preparations for Sunday's service. He hesitated before adding, "She seemed troubled." Mark raised an eyebrow. Troubled how? The priest glanced away, choosing his words carefully. She mentioned something about things not being as they seemed, but she wouldn't say more. I assumed it was personal. His answer was vague, too vague for Allison's liking. She studied him closely. His posture was rigid, his voice calm, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation, of something unspoken. Next, they questioned Amelia Ross, the church secretary, one of the last people to interact with Maria before she disappeared. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. She was different the last few weeks, Amelia admitted. She was asking a lot of questions about church finances, about certain books in the archives that hadn't been touched in years. I told her to let it go, that some things weren't meant to be dug up, but she wouldn't listen. Allison exchanged a glance with Mark. What things? Amelia hesitated. I don't know. She never told me exactly. More vagueness. More missing pieces. But then there was Lisa Carter, Maria's best friend, the woman who had found her body. Unlike the others, Lisa wasn't hiding her emotions. Her grief was raw, her voice shaking with barely contained anger. She was scared, Lisa insisted. Maria never told me what she found, but she told me she was afraid of someone. I thought she was imagining things. I should have listened. Allison's voice softened. Do you think she suspected someone? Lisa swallowed hard, then nodded. She didn't say it outright, but I think she was afraid of someone from the church. A heavy silence filled the room. The deeper the detectives dug, the clearer it became. Maria had discovered something she wasn't meant to, and one of the very people standing before them knew exactly what that was. But who? And how far would they go to keep the truth buried? Detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway knew that to understand why Maria Grayson was murdered, they had to dig into her past. On the surface, Maria's life seemed spotless. She was loved by the community, deeply involved in the church, and always willing to help others. But the way she was killed, the sheer brutality of it, suggested something much deeper. Someone wanted her silenced. Someone wanted to erase her. So what was Maria hiding? The first stop was her home, a small, neatly kept house just a few blocks from the church. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication that she had been in distress before she left that night. But inside, the detectives found something unexpected, a locked desk drawer. After forcing it open, they uncovered a journal, pages filled with hurried, anxious handwriting. As they flipped through, a pattern emerged. Maria had been keeping secrets of her own. The entry started off simple. Notes about church events, her daily routine, interactions with parishioners. But then, the tone shifted. The writing became frantic, fearful. One entry, dated 3 weeks before her death, stood out. I don't know who else to turn to. Something isn't right. The numbers don't add up. Money is moving where it shouldn't be. And the things I found in the archives, I shouldn't have seen them. But I did. And now, I think someone knows. Church finances. Something hidden in the archives. And then, just 5 days before she was killed, her last entry. I have to tell someone. But who can I trust? I feel like I'm being watched, like someone knows what I found. I keep telling myself it's in my head, but last night, I heard footsteps outside my window. I'm scared. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Allison exhaled sharply, closing the journal. She knew she was in danger. Mark nodded grimly, and she was right. But what had she found? And more importantly, who else knew that she had found it? Maria Grayson wasn't just murdered. She was hunted. From the moment the investigation began, Father Daniel McKinnon had been at the center of it all. As the leader of St. Mark's Church, he was expected to be the pillar of strength for the grieving community. But instead of offering clarity, his responses to the police were vague, calculated, carefully measured rather than truthful. Detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway sat across from him in the church office, watching as he nervously twisted the silver cross around his neck. All we need is a clear timeline, Allison said, her voice steady but firm. Where were you the night Maria was murdered? Father Daniel let out a slow breath. I was here, he said, praying, as I do most nights. Mark frowned. Alone? The priest nodded. Yes. No one can confirm that. Father Daniel's jaw tensed. Does my word not mean anything? Allison exchanged a glance with Mark before leaning forward. It's not about your word, Father. It's about the fact that Maria was murdered inside your church, in a room that only a few people had access to. And you're telling us you didn't hear anything? No screams? No struggle? Father Daniel shifted uncomfortably. A moment of hesitation. a flicker of something in his eyes before he lowered his gaze. "I was deep in prayer," he murmured. I must not have heard." Silence stretched between them. The excuse was weak. Too weak. Mark studied him. "Maria worked closely with you. Did she ever tell you she was scared?" The priest pursed his lips. "No." "Did she mention finding anything in the church archives? Anything that troubled her?" "No." The answers were coming too quickly now. Too rehearsed. But then Allison played her next card. She slid Maria's journal across the table. "She mentioned you, Father," she said, her voice sharp. "She said she had questions about the church's finances, about something in the archives, and that she was afraid she had seen something she wasn't supposed to." Father Daniel's face remained eerily still, but his hands tightened around his cross, knuckles turning white. "That's nonsense," he said flatly. Maria was troubled. Allison narrowed her eyes. So troubled that someone decided to silence her? For the first time, the priest's carefully controlled demeanor cracked. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "I had nothing to do with Maria's death." His voice was low, measured, but Allison and Mark weren't convinced. Because Father Daniel wasn't acting like a man mourning a devoted member of his congregation. He was acting like a man hiding something. Back at the station, Detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway sat in a dimly lit office. Maria Grayson's journal spread open between them. Every word, every sentence, felt like a whisper from beyond the grave, a plea for help that had come too late. But it wasn't just the journal that held secrets. A digital forensic analyst had been combing through Maria's emails, and what he found sent a chill down their spines. Mark scanned the screen, reading aloud, "You need to stop asking questions. Some things are not meant to be uncovered." The email was sent from an anonymous account, just 1 week before Maria's murder. Another message followed, sent 2 days later. Curiosity can be dangerous. Walk away before it's too late. And then, just 48 hours before she was killed, the final message. "This is your last warning." Allison clenched her jaw. She wasn't just scared. She was being hunted. The emails weren't signed. No name. No way to trace the sender. But someone in Ashford had been watching Maria, waiting for her to dig too deep. And when she did, they made sure she never spoke about it. Flipping through her journal, Allison's eyes landed on a passage that now sent shivers down her spine. "I feel like I'm being followed. Every time I turn around, I catch a shadow slipping out of sight. At first, I thought it was my imagination. But last night, I saw someone standing outside my house. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of their body. They didn't move. They just watched. I don't know what I've uncovered, but someone doesn't want to find out more. And I don't know if I can stop now." Mark exhaled sharply. She knew she was in danger. Allison nodded. "And whoever sent these emails, they made sure she never got a chance to tell anyone what she found." The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but Detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway still faced one burning question. Was Maria Grayson killed out of personal revenge, or was this something much bigger? Sitting in the dim glow of their office, they spread out the evidence before them. Maria's journal entries, revealing her growing fear and suspicion. The anonymous emails, warning her to stop asking questions. The missing page in the church archives, the one Maria had likely found before she was murdered. The cryptic note at the crime scene, declaring that Maria saw something she wasn't supposed to. Mark ran a hand through his hair. "This doesn't feel like personal revenge. It feels calculated. Someone didn't just want her dead. They wanted to erase her." Allison nodded. "And if this was about a secret Maria uncovered, then that means we're dealing with something much bigger than a simple grudge." They turned back to Father Daniel McKinnon. The priest's reluctance to speak, the contradictions in his statements, his vague excuses, all of it pointed to something deeper. The church wasn't just a place of worship. It was a sanctuary for secrets. And Maria had uncovered something buried within those walls. Mark tapped the crime scene photos. Whoever killed her didn't just want her dead. They wanted to send a message. They wanted to make sure no one else started asking the same questions. Allison's eyes darkened, which means Maria wasn't just murdered. She was silenced. As the chilling details of Maria Grayson's murder spread through Ashford, the once unshakable faith of the community began to crumble. St. Mark's Church, once a beacon of hope, now stood as a grim reminder of the horror that had unfolded within its walls. Where there were once filled pews and whispered prayers, now there was only emptiness. People who had spent years attending Mass, seeking guidance from Father Daniel McKinnon, now hesitated before stepping through the grand wooden doors. Some came, out of habit, but their eyes darted with suspicion, their whispers hushed and fearful. Others had already made up their minds. They would never return. At the local cafe, small clusters of townsfolk gathered, their voices tense with uncertainty. If something like this can happen in a church, what does that say about us? They still haven't arrested anyone. What if the killer is still walking among us? Maria was a good woman. If someone wanted her dead, then maybe none of us are safe. The fear seeped into everyday life. Parents started walking their children to school instead of letting them roam freely. Doors that had once been left unlocked were now bolted shut. And at night, the streets of Ashford felt eerily deserted, as if the town itself was holding its breath. But worst of all, the community no longer trusted their own. Neighbors who had once shared warm smiles now exchanged wary glances. Every familiar face had become a potential suspect. Who among them was capable of something this monstrous? The town of Ashford had always believed evil could never reach them. But now, they couldn't help but wonder, had it been hiding among them all along? The deeper detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway dug, the more they realized that Maria Grayson's murder wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger, something buried deep within St. Mark's Church. They had already suspected that Maria had uncovered a dangerous secret before she was killed. Now they had proof. While going through the church's financial records, Allison spotted something that didn't add up. On the surface, the church's books looked clean, offerings, donations, routine expenses. But hidden beneath layers of paperwork was a trail of transactions that shouldn't have existed. Mark frowned as he studied the files. These transfers, they don't match the church's official statements. Following the money, they traced the transactions to an offshore bank account, one that wasn't listed anywhere in the church's financial disclosures. Allison narrowed her eyes. This account, it's registered under the name of Daniel McKinnon. The revelation sent a chill through the room. The church's beloved priest, the man who had built his reputation on morality and faith, had been funneling money into a secret account, and Maria had found out. Mark exhaled sharply. So this wasn't just about faith. It wasn't even just about Maria. This was about money, corruption, and someone willing to kill to keep it hidden. But the question remained, who else knew about it? And how far would they go to keep the truth buried? As detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway pieced together the final moments of Maria Grayson's life, one thing became undeniable. She had discovered something that sealed her fate. The evidence was everywhere. Her frantic journal entries, the threatening emails, the missing church records, and now, the secret bank account tied to Father Daniel McKinnon. All of it pointed to a sinister truth Maria had uncovered just before her death. But what exactly had she found? The answer lay in a single missing page, the one Maria had taken from the church archives before she was killed. When forensic analysts reconstructed burned fragments of paper found near the crime scene, they revealed a shocking discovery. It wasn't just financial fraud that Maria had stumbled upon. It was a decades-old cover-up. The missing document was a church ledger from over 15 years ago, detailing large, unexplained payouts made to an unnamed recipient. But scrawled in the margins, in handwriting that didn't match the rest of the records, was a single name, Stephen Fletcher. Mark's heart pounded. Who the hell is Stephen Fletcher? Allison's fingers flew over the keyboard as she ran the name through their database. Seconds later, the truth hit them like a freight train. Stephen Fletcher was a private investigator, one who had been hired by the church years ago. And his specialty? Burying scandals before they ever saw the light of day. Maria had found proof that St. Mark's Church had been involved in more than just financial fraud. She had uncovered something dangerous enough to kill for. And now, the detectives knew someone in Ashford had been willing to do just that. As detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway unraveled the layers of corruption surrounding St. Mark's Church, they began to suspect that Maria Grayson's murder wasn't just about one man's greed. There was something darker at play. The missing financial records, the offshore accounts, and the name of private investigator Stephen Fletcher, all of it pointed to a larger conspiracy within the church. Maria had uncovered something more than fraud. She had discovered the existence of a secret group operating from within St. Mark's. But who were they, and what were they hiding? The detectives' breakthrough came when they traced a series of coded transactions buried deep within the church's bank statements. Mark's eyes narrowed. These payments, they weren't just going to one account. There are multiple recipients. Allison studied the list. And look at the dates. These aren't random. Every single one of these payouts happened after someone left town unexpectedly. People who had been active members of the church. People who had suddenly disappeared without explanation. Some were former employees. Some were longtime parishioners. And some were people who had started asking questions. Just like Maria, Allison felt a chill run down her spine. What if Maria wasn't the first? A pattern was emerging. Anyone who dug too deep, anyone who questioned the wrong things, either left Ashford or vanished. And now Maria had paid the ultimate price. The detectives had suspected one killer. Now, they feared they were dealing with something far worse. A secret society within the church. A group willing to do whatever it took to keep their sins buried. And the worst part? They still weren't sure how many of them were left. As detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway dug deeper into Father Daniel McKinnon's past, they began to wonder, was he just covering up a crime, or was he the one who had committed it? On the surface, Father Daniel was a well-respected figure in Ashford. He had led St. Mark's Church for over a decade, delivering sermons on morality, faith, and redemption. But what if his past told a different story? Mark pulled up personnel records from the diocese. Before coming to Ashford, Father Daniel served at St. Vincent's Church in Crestwood, but he left after just 3 years. Allison frowned. That's unusual. Priests don't just get transferred without reason. They contacted the diocese headquarters, requesting any records on Father Daniel's tenure at St. Vincent's. When the files arrived, the truth became impossible to ignore. Multiple complaints had been filed against him, all of them anonymous. A sudden financial discrepancy appeared in the church's funds before he left. And the most chilling part? A young woman had gone missing just months before his transfer. Mark tapped the screen. A parishioner named Elena Brooks disappeared without a trace. No family, no connections, and no real investigation. Allison's pulse quickened, and Father Daniel left right after that. They pulled old news reports from the time of Elena's disappearance. One witness, a local janitor, had claimed he saw Elena arguing with a man inside the church late one night, but no charges were ever filed. The reason? Father Daniel's alibi had come from the church itself. Mark's voice was cold. The church protected him once. What if they're protecting him again? Allison nodded grimly. And what if Maria Grayson found out? The pattern was undeniable. Financial fraud. A secret group covering up church secrets. A missing woman from his past. And now Maria, murdered inside his church after uncovering the truth. The evidence was stacking up. Maria hadn't just uncovered corruption. She had uncovered a killer. And Father Daniel McKinnon might have been hiding in plain sight all along. For, you said, the turning point. ChatGPT said, the investigation had hit a wall. Until a new witness came forward. Detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway had been chasing fragments of truth, piecing together the corruption hidden within St. Mark's Church and the web of secrets that had gotten Maria Grayson killed. But what they needed was proof. And then, out of nowhere, they got a call from Henry Wallace, an elderly man who had lived in Ashford his entire life. He hesitated as he sat across from the detectives, his wrinkled hands clutching his hat. I wasn't sure if I should say anything. I didn't think it mattered at first. Allison leaned forward. Henry, anything you saw that night might help us. The old man took a shaky breath. I was walking home late that night, just past St. Mark's Church. It was quiet, too quiet, but then I saw someone, a man slipping out the back in trance. Mark's eyes narrowed. Did you see his face? Henry hesitated. No, but I saw something else. He swallowed hard. His hands, they were covered in blood. Silence filled the room. Allison's heart pounded. What did he do next? Henry's fingers tightened around his hat. He didn't run. He just walked away, calm, like he knew nobody would suspect him. Mark pressed. Can you describe anything about him? Henry nodded slowly. Tall, broad shoulders. He walked with a purpose, like a man who knew exactly where he was going. The detectives exchanged a look. The description was too familiar. Allison exhaled sharply. Henry! Think carefully. Was he wearing a priest's robe? Henry hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Father Daniel McKinnon hadn't just covered up Maria's murder. He had committed it. With Henry Wallace's testimony pointing directly at Father Daniel McKinnon, Detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway knew they were close, but they needed undeniable proof. They turned their attention to something they had initially overlooked, the church's security cameras. At first, it seemed like a dead end. The main security system had been disabled the night of the murder. The cameras covering the main entrance and interior hallways showed nothing out of the ordinary. But then, while reviewing footage from a nearby street camera, Allison noticed something. A small hidden security camera, one mounted on a shop across the street from St. Mark's Church. The shop owner, an elderly woman named Margaret Ellis, had forgotten about the camera entirely. It had been installed years ago after a few petty thefts, and she rarely checked footage. When the detectives retrieved the recording from the night of Maria's murder, their breath caught in their throats. At 2:17 a.m., the camera captured a shadowy figure emerging from the back entrance of the church, exactly as Henry Wallace had described. The figure didn't run, didn't hesitate. He simply walked away, as if nothing had happened. As Allison enhanced the footage, the streetlight briefly illuminated his face. And there he was, Father Daniel McKinnon, his robes darkened with blood, his face expressionless, cold, calculated. Mark clenched his jaw. He didn't even try to hide it. Allison nodded grimly, because he thought no one would ever suspect him. This was it, the evidence they needed. Father Daniel had tried to hide behind his faith, behind his reputation. But now, the truth was staring them in the face. Maria had seen something she wasn't supposed to, and to keep his secret safe, Father Daniel McKinnon had murdered her in cold blood, with the security footage confirming Father Daniel McKinnon leaving the church covered in blood. Detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway were closing in, but they needed one final piece of evidence, something that would leave no room for doubt. That breakthrough came from a forensic team. A technician, Ethan Clark, called him in with a discovery from the crime scene that had initially gone unnoticed. We reanalyzed the blood evidence, Ethan explained, pulling up a digital report. Most of it belonged to Maria Grayson, but there was something else. Allison and Mark leaned in. Go on. Ethan zoomed in on the murder weapon, a ceremonial dagger found near Maria's body. There were traces of a second person's blood on the handle. Mark's brow furrowed. You're saying the killer was injured? Ethan nodded. Not a deep wound, just a small cut, likely from Maria trying to fight back. We almost missed it. Allison's heart pounded. Tell me you have a DNA match. Ethan smiled grimly and handed them the report. DNA match, Daniel McKinnon. The room went silent. Mark exhaled. That's it. That's our proof. Father Daniel hadn't just been seen at the church that night. His blood was at the crime scene. Maria had fought for her life, and in doing so, she had left behind the one clue that would bring her killer to justice. Allison grabbed her coat. It's time to take him in. With undeniable evidence now in their hands, security footage, DNA from the crime scene, and witness testimony, Detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway were no longer asking who killed Maria Grayson. They knew Father Daniel McKinnon was the murderer. But now, the real question remained. Why? What had driven a man of faith, a spiritual leader, a figure of trust and guidance, to commit such a brutal, calculated murder? Sitting across from him in the interrogation room, Allison watched as Father Daniel's usually composed expression began to crack under the weight of silence. Finally, she broke it. "You killed her." Her voice was steady, sharp. "We have the evidence. We have the DNA. We have you on camera. You can stop pretending." Father Daniel's fingers intertwined, his knuckles pale. But he didn't deny it. Instead, he exhaled slowly and said, "She left me no choice." Mark's jaw tightened. No choice? She was a defenseless woman. What could she have possibly done that justified you slaughtering her in cold blood? Father Daniel's gaze darkened, his lips pressed into a thin line. "She knew things she shouldn't have," he murmured. Allison leaned forward. "Things like what? The offshore accounts? The missing funds? The church's hidden dealings?" His eye twitched. She went too far. The room grew colder. Allison exchanged a glance with Mark before pressing on. "It wasn't just money, was it?" she asked, her voice lowering. "Maria found something more than fraud. Something worse. Something that could destroy you." Father Daniel's jaw clenched. "She found the ledger." His voice was barely a whisper. The ledger, the one Maria had torn a page from, the one that had led them to Stephen Fletcher, the private investigator hired by the church years ago. Mark's heartbeat quickened. And what was in that ledger? Father Daniel let out a bitter chuckle. Proof. His gaze flickered with something between remorse and rage. Proof that St. Mark's wasn't just a place of faith. It was a shield, a cover for things that could never come to light. Allison's breath hitched. Maria had evidence that the church was hiding more than financial fraud, that there was a pattern. People who questioned too much disappearing. Father Daniel nodded. She thought she could expose it. She thought she could change things. He shook his head, a slow, almost regretful movement. She was wrong. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy. Mark's voice was low, almost disgusted. "And you silenced her." Father Daniel inhaled deeply before looking directly at them for the first time. Unapologetic, unflinching. "I did what had to be done." And in that moment, Allison and Mark realized this wasn't about one murder. This was about a system that had existed long before Maria and would continue long after her, unless they stopped it. The confession had been chilling. Father Daniel McKinnon, once the respected leader of St. Mark's Church, had finally admitted what detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway already knew. He had murdered Maria Grayson, but his confession did more than just confirm the crime. It ripped open a deeper truth, one that had been buried beneath years of silence, corruption, and hidden sins within the church's walls. The web of lies unraveled. After Father Daniel's arrest, law enforcement launched a full-scale investigation into St. Mark's Church. The missing ledger Maria had found was just the tip of the iceberg. Bank records exposed a long history of financial fraud. Large sums of money funneled into offshore accounts, concealed through fake church donations. The private investigator, Stephen Fletcher, had been hired to suppress scandals, ones that involved not just financial corruption, but the disappearances of people who had started asking the wrong questions. Documents revealed at least 3 other individuals, former parishioners, who had mysteriously vanished under Father Daniel's tenure at St. Mark's. Maria had unknowingly uncovered a pattern, and for that, she had been killed. The town's reaction. When news of the church's crimes finally became public, the town of Ashford was left paralyzed with disbelief. The man they had trusted, the man they had prayed with, confessed to, sought comfort from, was a murderer. Some refused to believe it, clinging to the illusion of Father Daniel's innocence, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But as the evidence mounted, the bank fraud, the missing persons cases, the DNA at the crime scene, the security footage, the truth became impossible to deny. St. Mark's Church had been a place of worship, but behind its sacred doors, it had also been a place of secrets, lies, and death. Justice is served. At trial, Father Daniel showed no remorse. Even when confronted with overwhelming evidence, he never once apologized for Maria's murder. His only defense? She shouldn't have been digging where she didn't belong. But the jury saw the truth for what it was. Verdict, guilty. Sentence, life in prison without parole. Maria had died fighting for the truth, and in the end, The truth had won. The downfall of St. Mark's Church didn't begin with Maria Grayson's murder. Evil had been festering within its walls for years, perhaps even decades. As detectives Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway continued to unravel the church's dark history, they discovered that Maria's death was not the beginning of the corruption, but merely the latest attempt to cover it up. Where did it begin? At first glance, Father Daniel McKinnon appeared to be the sole orchestrator of these crimes. But as investigators traced back to the church's financial records, confidential documents, and buried testimonies, one thing became disturbingly clear. Father Daniel hadn't created the darkness inside St. Mark's. He had inherited it. The corruption didn't start with him. It had been passed down from those who came before him. It began with small compromises. A little money siphoned here and there from church funds. A few secrets buried to protect the church's reputation. A blind eye turned when accusations of misconduct arose. But sin doesn't stay small. It festers. It grows. And soon it consumes everything in its path. The hidden offshore accounts, the mysterious disappearances, the hush money paid to silence those who questioned too much, all of it pointed to something bigger. This wasn't just one priest going rogue. It was a system, a cycle of secrecy, power, and control. How did it spread? Over time, St. Mark's had transformed from house of faith into a fortress of corruption. Whistleblowers were silenced. If a parishioner or employee questioned too much, they were pressured to leave, paid off, or, like Maria, eliminated. The church's wealth was protected at all costs. Large donations from unknown sources, laundered through offshore accounts, ensured that those in power stayed in power. Fear replaced faith. People stopped questioning the church's authority, choosing blind loyalty over uncomfortable truth. By the time Father Daniel took over, the system was already in place, and he didn't stop it. He perfected it. When Maria Grayson uncovered the truth, she threatened to expose more than just one man's crimes. She threatened to unravel an entire institution, and that's why she had to die. The final realization. As the church's doors closed for good, the town of Ashford was forced to face a hard truth. Evil doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes it grows where you least expect it. Even within the walls of a sacred place, the town of Ashford had always prided itself on its faith, its unity, its belief that evil could never touch them. But now, that illusion had been shattered. When the truth about Father Daniel McKinnon and the corruption within St. Mark's Church became public, the town's reaction was immediate and devastating. Shock and denial. For many, it was impossible to believe. Father Daniel? A murderer? A fraud? No, it can't be true. Some refused to accept the evidence, clinging desperately to the man they had trusted for years. Even as the DNA evidence, security footage, and bank records proved his guilt, they convinced themselves it was a mistake, that he had been framed, that this was some kind of test of faith. The church doors remained locked, but some still gathered outside, praying for his redemption. But others, they knew better. Betrayal and grief. For those who believed in St. Mark's Church as a pillar of righteousness, the truth left them feeling lost. The elderly woman who had attended Mass every Sunday for 40 years, now questioning if she had ever truly known the man behind the pulpit. The parents who had trusted Father Daniel with their children's spiritual upbringing, now wondering if he had ever really cared for their souls. The grieving families of those who had gone missing in years past, finally understanding why they had never found answers. Tears replaced prayers. For some, faith itself felt like it had been poisoned. If the man they trusted most had been capable of such darkness, what else had they been blind to? Anger and reckoning. But not everyone mourned. Some were furious. Furious that a murderer had been allowed to stand on the altar for so long. Furious that warnings had been ignored. Furious that Maria Grayson had to die before anyone was willing to see the truth. Some stood outside the now-abandoned St. Mark's Church, demanding that it be torn down, declaring that its walls had been tainted beyond redemption. Others left the church forever, vowing to never again put blind faith in an institution without questioning its power. Faith or fear. In the weeks following Father Daniel's conviction, something changed in Ashford. The town had always been one of faith and trust. But now, those words carried a different weight. People no longer accepted things at face value. They asked more questions. They paid closer attention. And for the first time, they understood a lesson they should have learned long ago. Faith is not about trusting without question. It's about knowing when to open your eyes. The trial of Father Daniel McKinnon was the most highly anticipated and emotionally charged event in Ashford's history. The courtroom was packed, not just with the grieving community, but with journalists, legal experts, and former parishioners, all waiting to see how justice would unfold. The trial begins. As Father Daniel was led into the courtroom, dressed in a plain suit instead of his priestly robes, the weight of his crimes hung heavy in the air. Gone was a charismatic leader, the trusted voice of faith. What stood before the judge was a murderer, a manipulator, a man who had used faith as a shield to hide his darkest sins. The prosecution laid out the case with unrelenting force. The DNA evidence from Maria's murder scene, the security footage of Father Daniel leaving the church, his hands stained with blood, the financial corruption, the hidden offshore accounts, the laundered money, the fraudulent donations, the pattern of missing persons tied to St. Mark's, suggested Maria was not the first to uncover the church's secrets. And then came the most damning moment of all, the reading of Maria Grayson's journal. Her own words, her fear, her determination to uncover the truth, and her final realization that she was being watched, echoed through the courtroom. The silence was deafening. Father Daniel's defense and his ultimate fate. When it was time for Father Daniel to speak, he showed no remorse. His final statement was chilling. The church is bigger than me, bigger than you. Maria didn't understand that. She wanted to destroy something sacred. I did what I had to do. No apologies, no regret, just cold, unwavering belief in his own righteousness. The jury did not deliberate for long. Verdict, guilty. Sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. The once revered priest of Ashford would never walk free again. The town that could never be the same. But even as justice was served, Ashford was forever changed. St. Mark's Church was shut down indefinitely. No one could bring themselves to worship in a place that had become synonymous with deception and death. Some wanted to burn it to the ground. Others said it should remain standing, as a reminder of what had happened. Families fractured. Some parishioners refused to believe the truth, calling the trial a witch hunt against faith. Others felt betrayed, questioning how they had been blind to the evil hiding among them. Maria Grayson became more than a murder victim. She became a symbol, a woman who had died searching for the truth. Some left Ashford, unable to bear the weight of what had happened. Those who stayed learned a painful lesson. Blind faith is dangerous. Trust should be earned. And the darkest evils are not always found in shadows. Sometimes they stand right in front of you, wearing a familiar face. The case of Maria Grayson's murder was more than just a tragedy. It was a reckoning. For years, the people of Ashford had believed that evil was something distant, something that happened in other places, to other people. They had placed blind trust in the sanctity of their church, in the man who led them, in the walls that were supposed to be sacred. But Maria's death proved an uncomfortable, undeniable truth. Evil doesn't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes it stands in the light, draped in robes of holiness, speaking the language of faith, and earning the trust of those who never think to question it. The lesson Ashford will never forget. Power without accountability breeds corruption. The church had protected Father Daniel McKinnon for years, allowing his crimes to go unchecked. Maria's murder was a cost of silence and unquestioned loyalty. Truth is dangerous, but silence is deadlier. Maria tried to expose something no one wanted to see, and for that, she paid with her life. Justice is never easy, but it is necessary. Exposing Father Daniel's crimes meant tearing down an institution people had spent their lives believing in. But faith should never come at the expense of truth. The streets of Ashford are quieter now. The church doors remain locked. People still gather in whispers, still look over their shoulders, still wonder how they missed the warning signs. But one thing is certain. Maria Grayson is gone, but her story remains. And now, the town will never again make the mistake of believing that evil only exists outside their walls. Because sometimes the greatest darkness doesn't hide in the night. It lives in the places we trust the most. The case of Maria Grayson left a wound in Ashford that would never fully heal. Her murder wasn't just a crime. It was a revelation. For years, people had walked into St. Mark's Church with complete faith, believing they were safe, believing they were in the presence of righteousness. But evil had been inside all along. It wasn't hidden in the shadows. It wasn't a stranger lurking in the dark. It was in plain sight, wearing a priest's collar, standing at the altar, preaching about morality while committing the ultimate sin. The real question. The people of Ashford had spent so much time asking the wrong question. They wondered, where does evil come from? They whispered, how could something like this happen here? But the real question, the one that haunted them now, wasn't about where evil hides. It was about how long they had ignored it. How many red flags had they dismissed? How many inconsistencies had they brushed aside? How many times had they chosen comfort over truth? Maria Grayson saw the truth, and she refused to look away. She didn't ignore the warnings. She didn't silence her doubts. She didn't choose the easy path. And for that, she was silenced. A final warning. The people of Ashford will never forget what happened. But the lesson of this case isn't just for them. It's for all of us. Because the next time we hear something that doesn't sit right, the next time we notice something that feels off, the next time we see someone asking questions that make others uncomfortable, we have a choice. We can ignore it. Pretend it's not our concern. Walk away like it's not our problem. Or we can listen. Because the real danger isn't just in the existence of evil. It's in how long we choose to ignore it. Ashford was never the same after the truth came out. The town that once thrived on trust and tradition had been forced to confront the ugliest reality, that the very institution they had built their lives around had harbored darkness for years. The doors of St. Mark's Church remained shut, its towering steeple now a haunting reminder of the betrayal that had unfolded within its walls. Some wanted to tear it down, erase its memory from Ashford forever. Others argued that it should stand as a warning, a monument to the dangers of blind faith and unchecked power. Picking up the pieces, the community struggled to move forward. Some left town, unable to bear the weight of what had been uncovered. Others chose to stay, trying to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Sunday mornings felt different. The once bustling streets leading to St. Mark's were empty, and families that had once gathered in the church pews now worshipped in their homes, hesitant to trust another religious leader. Parents held their children a little closer. They no longer blindly trusted institutions. They taught their kids to ask questions, to be wary of those who demanded loyalty without accountability. Neighbors looked at each other differently. The warmth had faded. The smiles weren't as quick. Everyone wondered how they had missed the warning signs. Some found solace in Maria Grayson's legacy. A group of townspeople created the Grayson Foundation, dedicated to protecting whistleblowers, advocating for transparency, and ensuring that no one in Ashford would ever be silenced the way Maria was. But even as Ashford tried to heal, some wounds never closed. The families of those who had gone missing years before Maria still had no closure. They would never know exactly what had happened to their loved ones. Some parishioners still defended Father Daniel, unable to accept that the man they had trusted had been a killer all along. Some people never stepped inside a church again, too afraid to believe in anything anymore. The shadow that never fully leaves. Ashford moved on, but it did not forget. The town had learned its lesson the hard way. Evil is not always a distant threat. Sometimes it stands right in front of us, disguised as something good. Maria Grayson had seen the truth. She had tried to warn them. And now, Ashford would make sure no one ignored the signs ever again. Because while the church may have fallen, the scars it left behind would remain forever. As the case of Maria Grayson comes to a close, one question lingers, not just for people of Ashford, but for all of us. We like to believe that evil is obvious, that it wears a face we can recognize, that it lurks in dark alleys and abandoned buildings. But what if it doesn't? What if it smiles at you every Sunday morning? What if it shakes your hand, offers you guidance, speaks in words of faith and righteousness? What if it hides in the very places you trust the most? Maria saw the truth, but by the time she realized what she had uncovered, it was too late. So now we ask you, have you ever looked at something and felt that something was off? Have you ever noticed a sign, a small inconsistency, a whispered doubt, and ignored it? Could there be something right in front of you, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered? Because if there's one lesson to take from this case, it's this. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a cross. And sometimes we don't see it until it's too late. If this story made you think, if it made you question what's hidden beneath the surface of the places we trust most, then we want to hear from you. Do you think Maria Grayson's murder could have been prevented? Have you ever ignored a feeling that something wasn't right? Do you believe that evil can truly be hidden in plain sight? Let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts, your questions, and your own experiences matter. And if you want to uncover more true crime mysteries, more hidden secrets, more stories of justice and deception, subscribe to Crime Chronicles Confidential so you never miss a case. Because the truth, it's always out there. The real question is, are you willing to see it? Stay curious, stay aware, and we'll see you in the next investigation.